all emotions and everything. Just think about it. Everything that we've been built to be is so efficient. The human body is so efficient. There's nothing there that's just there. It's there for a reason. And so if you're feeling emotion, those things are there for a reason, and you have to give it a reason. And one of the things I think is that most emotions are fuel to act.
Mike Uwandi is a concept artist and art director for live-action films and video
So if you're
games.
feeling
He is a
emotion, those things are
co-founder of
there for a
9B
reason,
Collective,
and you
a
have to
company
give it
that
a
shifts
reason.
the
And one of the
entertainment
things I
landscape
think
by
is that
pushing
most
for
emotions are
inclusivity
fuel
within the
to
industry.
act.
Some of his clients include Marvel Studios, Warner Brothers, Disney, Sony Pictures, and 21st Century Fox. His most recent work for Mandalorian and Westworld were nominated for an Emmy in Outstanding Sci-Fi Costume. Please join us for a conversation that details Mike's journey and his artistic career. Hello, and welcome to the Painted in Color podcast. I'm co host Lauren Brown, joined by co host Mia Araujo and the wonderful, illustrious Mike Uwandi, who is the concept artist and art director working at 9B Studios, a co founder of 9B Studios, in fact. So, we're going to get into it and talk about Mike and his amazing body of work and his career and the start of everything. So, Mike, how you doing?
How y'all doing? It's good to see y'all.
Good to see y'all
I'm all
too.
right. I'm all right.
Yeah, no, I got the wonderful fortune to actually meet you in person at Lightbox Expo. So I would love to talk about that because you had done a panel with Phil Boutte and Frank Abney, Everett Downing, Kristen Garland, a bunch of amazing people. Oh, Marlon West. How could I forget Marlon West? I know, right? And so I'm really curious, like, about your experience because we just actually came off an episode talking about Lightbox Expo and how awesome it was, and so I would love to hear about it from you too, and just like what you got into.
Yeah, that expo was just amazing. It was just I for one, I went to the first one and I remember it being kind of just different for me. Because it was like the first time I was like, oh, I'm actually in the industry working, and like now I'm just like here with my peers, you know? And then this second one, it was like interesting to be like truly involved in it, you know, like not just with
Yeah,
9B, also like the panel that you attended, and like I think I had like four other panels, and it was just really cool. But most of all, the thing that I was happiest about, honestly, was just seeing so many other like artists of color.
yes.
Just because what I'm familiar with, I basically long story, but I used to go to every single workshop along the West Coast. So California, Seattle, like every single one. And you might think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. And I would always be either the only Black person. I might get lucky if I've never seen like another Latin person unless it was like John Navarez. Um,
Yeah,
like I would just be the only one. And I remember being like, this is crazy. And then coming to this Lightbox Expo, just seeing so many, I was like kind of shocked. Like I was like, this is dope. Like you just already kind of see the transition of how the industry is turning over. Uh,
yeah,
that like for me was just like, wow, like it kind of felt like something. I think like generally I am known to like kind of tenure my excitement about things, but that was like the first time I think I allowed myself to be truly excited about anything ever that I can think of. Probably when I have like a kid or something, I'll probably get excited, but like that, like
going to Lightbox is a close second.
second.
Yeah, no, that
Really
definitely struck
cool.
me too. I noticed how much more diverse Lightbox was compared to any other expo like that I've ever been to. And
Mm-hmm.
like legit, there was that whole Saturday, most of that day was spent with almost all Black animators and at least animators of color. And I was like, how did I get like this has never happened to me before in my career where I can be at a convention and like I hang out with like 10 people and we all can speak from really similar or the same experiences. And I'm like, I feel like at home and like I've like it's a family reunion of sorts. Like it felt really
Yeah,
good.
yeah. There was like a few moments, like just kind of walking around the well, I forgot the area, the exhibition area.
Yeah.
Like we just like stop in the middle, and then there's like another Black guy, and they're like, "Hey," and then a like Black girl, and they're like, "Hey," and then we're just like literally in the middle, just taking up all the spots. And it's like I've never met you before, but I'm glad to see you here. It was just
Yeah,
like
I was like,
it
I
kind of
see
felt like
you.
a family reunion type of vibe, and I was like, that's cool. Like I just like I said, I never had that in the art industry. For as long as I've been working, I'm sure you guys have heard the stories between like even Phil himself saying like he's never worked with another black person in the industry, and like for me, it's been the same thing. If I'm lucky, I've had one. So it's crazy to see like just a congregation, just all these different artists from different disciplines too, kind of just be like, yo, what up? And like not be afraid to just say, what's up? That
Yeah,
was really dope. I just loved it. That
that's
was
the
like
best
that
feeling.
was my like top tier excitement of the month of the year, probably like just seeing all of that. It was cool.
Yeah, it was a feeling like nothing else for sure.
Mhm.
But let's run it back a little bit. I'm curious as to just like how you got your start. And like I know you were just talking about the fact that you haven't really seen that many like black people creating before something very inclusive like Lightbox Expo. But when you were younger, I'm curious as to like what your work was, what influenced it, and like how you got your start essentially as a young artist.
Oh man. All right. So um, it's quite the winding journey, but essentially, my dad is a aerospace engineer and he's also a mechanic. And he used to draw cars. And so the only thing that we would do together outside of like working out is I'm talking about like since a baby. This is like my routine. Work out, draw, take a shower, go to school. And we would, draw all the time and but my dad and my mom, they worked so much that they would send me next door. But it just so happened in South Central LA, which is like, this is crazy. My neighbor, who was also my babysitter, happened to be a man, a black dude who went to serve in Japan as well as Vietnam. And he came back. He's a kung fu like black belt, like 3 degree, and came back and was just like a huge fan of anime. This is like
Oh my God.
90s, early 90s.
Wow.
Like I'm talking about like 91, 92. Just I'm talking about boxes of anime, like Record of Lodos, Ninja Scroll, this, that, and the third. He
What?
had every comic book I could imagine, old school ones from the 50s, and would just be watching cartoons. That was my babysitter, and I was with him most of the day. So the combination between him and my dad, as well as my mom, who is highly into fashion, they would just kind of like, without knowing, kind of cultivate me just drawing. And my mom would take me to these art classes and stuff like that. And it was really fun. But eventually, because of where I grew up, I also recognized it wasn't cool. And so I stopped drawing for like 10 years. I hid it. I hid the fact that I would draw, but people would kind of eventually find out. And then I started kind of getting in with like the wrong crowds and stuff like that and doing all the crazy stuff. But my older brother was like, yo, he was on the way to getting his dream job. And right before he got his dream job, the last thing I remember him saying was, yeah, I really wish you got back into art. Someday we'll just own a company and like make video games. And I was like, yeah, maybe, whatever. And I just like kind of brushed it off. And then he passed. But then like the day before he got his job, which is a whole nother story. But eventually my dad, because he's Nigerian, you have to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer. He was very hard on pushing that journey for me. So I started getting into pre-med and like getting into that side of things. But then eventually my mom kind of like slyly like kind of just was like, hey, I really wish you would get back into art. If you did, I would support you. And I was like, it kind of sat in my head, but I was like, yeah, but being a doctor is kind of cooler. And so I had like, and I have these spells a lot where I just kind of sit and like hear nothing, do nothing, and just like chill in silence. And I remember I was working at a job that I did not enjoy. And I remember being like, well, if I became a doctor, like, yeah, I'm doing that for other people, but I'm mostly doing it for myself. And I remember being like, what job could I take on, a career could I take on to that would actually like I would actually be able to make a change. And I was like thinking about things because I think like generally what we hear most is like most artists say, well, I didn't have a choice. Only thing I was good at was art. Right. And that wasn't necessarily my story. Like, I was pretty good academically. I was pretty good like in sports, but then also I was not at this time good at art. But I remember what I had done or like how active I was with that. And I eventually was like, well, if I tackle this like I did everything else, I think that I can like become a professional. And if I got in, I noticed that I wouldn't see content of other people of color. And I really like to teach a lot. And so I had a plan, and it was just like, I want to get into the industry. I want to get from A to B as fast as possible, get high enough in the industry to have enough clout to teach. That was like it. And eventually start a company. That's all I really wanted. I didn't want to like hang around in the industry and like work, Marvel, I love you, but like Marvel and all that stuff. I just only wanted to do that to be able to teach because I felt like there was a big spot missing there. That I would see. Uh, I'm gonna be very like unfiltered. That's
Oh, please,
um,
by all means.
but the whole like you know everyone who's your skin folk ain't your kinfolk thing. Like I
Mhm.
would notice that. I would notice working the dead end job I was working at the time. That a lot of times people of color can be pretty monolithic in the sense of like once they people view them that way, but then when it comes to getting into that position, it almost like I want to be this, I want to be that person, but I don't look down to help my group.
Mm,
And it always,
internalize them.
yeah, and it always kind of bothered me. So it was like, okay, well, if you become successful, that means you can't do that, right? And you have to kind of change that because that's not the way. Nothing's ever going to change if someone just doesn't do it. But you can't be the only person doing this and then thinking that you're making like that big of a move. It's not. When you're doing it for self, it's like okay, you know. So I really wanted to like do that, and so it kind of supercharged me quite a bit to like really tackle it and get into school. And I went to school in San Francisco, and then after 2 semesters, a teacher was like, you should go to a school called Art Center. And I
Oh,
was like, Art Center, where's that? And he was like, oh, it's in Southern California. And I was like, I just came from there. Like, so I came back down and I went to Art Center, like they had this thing called Art Center at night. And it was kind of funny because I took this class and this teacher was really like an interesting teacher, put it like that. And I pretty much put my portfolio together and I was like, all right, I'm gonna apply to this. I'm gonna apply to Art Center, but I'm gonna like, go to this thing they had called like College Day, which like
mhm.
all the colleges from the Midwest to the West Coast were like there on Art Center campus. And I don't know if they still do that. But I felt like it would be a good way to like get my feelers out to see like if my portfolio was good enough. And so basically, I went there and there was, I think, 50 colleges there. And I was like, I'm going to show my portfolio to every school and then I'm going to save Art Center for the end.
Oh,
Right. And I showed it. And every time I show it, they're like, yeah, you're really good. All I had was like mostly sketchbook stuff and a few digital pieces. And they're like, oh, yeah, this is good. You can get into this school, no problem. You can get into that school, no problem. So eventually I kind of was like, all right, I think I got this. Now I'm gonna approach Art Center. I went there and I waited in line and I was with, my closest friend at the time. She was my girlfriend at the time. And I get to the front of the line and the lady opens up my portfolio and she's like, ew. And I was like,
what?
yes. And
You
like,
said ill?
she literally said ill. And I was like, what? And she was like, oh, are you trying to get into the entertainment track? And I was like, yeah. She's like, oh no, well, maybe next year. And I was like, next year? And she's like, yeah, because you're definitely not getting in this year. You need a lot of work. And I remember like being so embarrassed, um, not just for myself, but in front of my girlfriend at the time. Like, this, I can't believe this is happening. She's like, yeah, you need this, and you got to do that, and you got to work on this. And I was like, so mad, walking back to the car and felt defeated. And I was like, I could do way better than this. This isn't even my best work. This is the best that I have. I'm talking all this shit. I'm keeping the buck. I'm talking all this shit. And like, my friend was so quiet. She's like literally the most quiet human I've ever known. Like the one time she talked, she's like, I get what you're saying, and I know what you can do, but I think you don't understand that no one else knows what you can do. So you should show people what you can do. And she was quiet. And I was so mad when she said that, I just stayed in my head. And I was just like, on the ride home, it was like a 45-minute drive home. I'm like, just all my mind is going crazy. And so the deadline to turn in your portfolio was, I think that week, it was like a Friday that week. This happened on like a Tuesday. I did 30 new pages, 100 and something new drawings, resubmitted it. That lady happened to call my phone and was like, hey, I'm just checking. Are you the guy I talked to, this and this time ago? I was like, yeah. And she's like, are you sure? Like, yes, I'm sure I'm the guy you talked to a few days ago. And she's like, well, are you down to like start like soon? And I was like, well, yeah, but I can't afford Art Center. It was way too expensive. My parents, because I came from San Francisco back down, they're like, all right, we ain't helping you. Like, you on your own. And like for like a few months, they're just like, I don't know how you're gonna do this. You can't afford Art Center. That's way too expensive. You need to get yourself a job. And in my head, I'm like, now looking, there's no way I would have been able to afford $22,000 a semester.
Absolutely.
With no kind of job. If I'm able to afford that with any kind of job, I might as well just stay at that.
Do that job.
Oh my God.
So, she calls me. She's like, well, what if I'm able to, chop off like 8,000? And to be honest, when she said that, I was like, kind of like, oh, that's cool. But I also was really ashamed to say, like, I still can't afford that. And then she was like, all right, give me 5 minutes. And she calls back, and she basically gives me a free ride. And I was like, oh shit.
I'm so glad you hesitated.
Yeah, because I was like so scared. Like I was like, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I recognized that growing up where I grew up in a bad neighborhood, but my parents were decent middle class, right? So in that spot, I was essentially pretty well off. But once I transplanted to being in like different types of areas, I didn't recognize I was poor. Like I was broke. So when I had to like say that, it was like the first time that I basically had to admit that I was not doing well financially. And it was kind of an embarrassment. But once I got the free ride, she basically was like, yeah, you're in a class, you're gonna be in a class full of like really heavy hitters. And I have a lot of faith that you'll do really good based on you doing what you did, this past week. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got in. And I really admired certain people. And so, though I wanted to graduate, there was a part of me that was like, I want to be able to get my first job by term 6. And I want to just be able to work, It kind of happened, but not quite. But yeah, so that's generally how it started, though. It's a lot of ups and downs and crazy stuff, but I'm glad it happened that way.
That's wild. I'm curious as to how it kind of happened.
Yeah. This, I feel like it's always like the pain that like kind of helps elevate most of us, and basically I was forcefully pushed out of school based on not being able to afford it, because essentially what happened was my scholarship stayed the same, but as you guys know, our schools typically each semester keep climbing.
Yeah.
So it got to a point where I could no longer afford to go, even though looking back, it really wasn't that much money. It was like $2,000, but when you broke $2,000 a lot of money.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So and I only had like 2 more semesters left. So I was really fortunate. I was applying to jobs like crazy, and I got like a really junior job designing like little icons for armor for a game. It was like, and for some reason, that was the most painful job ever. Paid me practically minimum wage, and I also happened to get kicked out of my mom's house that like the day I got that job, and I forgot what the question was, but basically,
oh, the story of how it kind of works.
yeah. So basically, I was like, all right, well, I kind of got out in 6 semesters, but I really didn't have a chance to kind of cultivate, like get the degree, do all the things that like I was aspiring to do. And I eventually was working there for 6 months. Then I got another job and I was working there for 3 months. And I was like, okay, like I'm doing pretty well. I think I can get a hang of this freelance thing. And then I didn't have a job for like 6 months at all. Like no interest at all. Like I was getting like a few calls, and then somehow these some of the interviewers would just drop off the face of the earth. So they'll call me, they'll be like, hey, you ready for a call on Monday? Yes, I'm there Monday, no call.
It would just go.
Which is like terrible. And it was kept happening over those months. And I'm looking at my account go lower and lower and lower until I was like in possibly the worst spot mentally that someone could be in. And I remember just kind of thinking like, I've seen this before, right? And I need to kind of flip my thinking because I was noticing I was starting to get into like a negative spiral. And I was also getting bitter. And I was like, I'm really attracting this negative energy. It's not really a good thing. I need to like fix that. And I literally was like, I'm going to fix it. I listened to a YouTube channel where I heard someone talking about like Comic-Con, which I'd never heard of before. And I was like, what is this? And they're like, yeah, these people are here, this person there, this person there. And I was like, I'm gonna try to go to Comic-Con. But once again, I had no money. And rent was due like, I think like in 2 weeks, which I didn't have money to pay for rent. And I was like, I gotta just take this chance. So I was like, hopefully someone presents me with something, a sign that I can find a way to get there because the tickets were sold out. As I found out, they are always sold out.
Yeah.
And I logged on to Facebook after not being on Facebook for like 2 months. And this guy, Brian Lee, was like, oh, I'm selling a day, like just post. It was the first post that popped up on my page. What? Selling a day pass for Comic-Con, if anyone wants to buy. And then he was charging like $300, which was literally $10 from all I had in my account. And I was like, all right, well, gotta take this chance. And I reached out to him. He hit me back. He sent me the ticket, and I was on my way. And on my way, I remember just literally mantra, 2-hour drive, like stay as positive as you can, blah, blah, blah. And I was just repeating it to myself. Halfway along the way, a friend, Rochelle, calls me, and she's like, hey, how far do you live from San Diego? And in my head, I'm like, pretty far. But I was like, not at all. I'm super close. Why? And she's like, oh, well, Bobby remembered you helping him for his booth last year and wanted to see if you were down to help again. And, he said that he would be able to give you like a 4-day pass. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I was like, all right, word. And so I was like, yes, I will do it. I will do it. I had no place to stay while I was up there. So I was literally like sleeping in my car in between the days, but no one knew that. But I was sleeping in my car, and then like 2 of the days I just drove back to LA and headed back out there. But I remember being like, all right, if this happening means you got to go like all the way. Like I was talking to everybody. I kind of got over like my introverted, nature at that moment. and was just like trying to talk to everyone possible. And eventually I finally found the costume guild. And they, I feel like, have been so elusive for most of my career. Like, just like, hey, how do I get into costume guild? People will literally make it into a movie where they're like, I don't know. I'm like, really? You don't know? Like, yeah, you're in it, really? And it was just like this unspoken, like, how do I get in? Someone was like, they came out of work and they're like, you should be in costume. And I was like, oh, what's that? He's telling me about it. And I was like, well, how do I get in? And then I swear to you, if I'm lying, I'm dying. He looks to the right, and this guy, I'm not going to say his name, was just like, gave him this stern face. And then he's like, I don't know. I guess you got to find out. And I was like, it was crazy. It was so crazy. I'm like, no one. We're just not going to call this out. So
is that competitive? Like they just didn't want to give up the secret?
I guess so. It's the craziest thing. I was like, I literally saw the face. He was just looking like, you say something, I'm killing you. And it's like, oh, all right. So, fast forward back to this. I finally found the costume guild, and there was 3 very disinterested people like sitting at the booth. And apparently it's because they weren't from the costume guild. And I was like nervous as hell. And I'm like walking with my portfolio in hand and all timid. And I'm like, hey, guys, like someone like smoking a cigar, looking like, what do you want, kid? And it was like one of those where they're like, yeah, so. And I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in joining. And there was this other lady who happened to be there, and she's like, join us what? And I was like, an illustrator. And she kind of like tossed her hair and rolled her eyes a little bit. And she's like, of course. And she's like, do you have a portfolio? And I was like, yeah. And I hand her my portfolio, and she like opens it and she's looking at it. And then she like stops on the first image and she's like, is this yours? And I was like, yeah. And then she's like, are you sure? I'm like, why does everyone ask me that? Yes, I'm sure. And
Sure.
she's like, she scrolls down, and all of a sudden she's like forward in her chair, and she's like, wow, this is yours? You did this? You did this? You did it? I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And then she's like, 1 second. And she calls someone, and she's like, you got to check this guy out. His name is Black Bear Uwandi or something like that. And she's like, you got to check his stuff out. He's really solid, and he's never worked in the industry at all. And she hangs up the phone, and she's like, yeah, so this guy, Phil, you should talk to him. Phil Boutte, you should talk to him. You're really good. You should be working already. And I was like, she's like, why aren't you working? And I'm like, because every time I try and get a job, people always say you should be working, but never want to get a job. And she was like, yeah. And she was like, well, you're going to be working soon. And I was like, all right, word. So struggled to get a hold of Phil, but I was walking around the Comic-Con, and I saw this amazing production designer who I really admired. And I was like, I walked up to him and I was like, hey, how do I work with you someday, or like work with like a production designer? And he's like, oh, well, let me see your work. And then he was like, who's your favorite artist? Your favorite, like, who are your inspirations? And I was like, oh, Charlie Wynn and Ryan Meinerding. And he was like, okay. And then he like closes it, and he gives me his card, and then he's like, all right, I'll chat with you in a few days. And that was my first job, and the money came just in time for me to pay my rent.
Wow.
And I was like, the job was a short job, but it was just enough time. And so then after that, I went on LinkedIn, and I eventually, like that same week, went on LinkedIn, and I was like trying to do my normal applying to jobs thing, and it wasn't working. And I was like, all right, this isn't working. This is lowering my like self-esteem again. And I was like, I'm gonna do one more. And after that, I need to find a different way of getting these jobs. I applied to one more job, and that's the job that like I had for like 3 years.
Wow.
And I was like, this is great. So, but it's like always been like those leaps of faith, basically, that I've taken that really helped me out a lot. And I've always seen it as like kind of a big blessing that like some of the doors that closed did. because it kind of helped lead me to where I eventually got to, right? And I can imagine that if I did get some of those jobs that I was applying for early, I probably would have stopped there.
Yeah.
Like paused there longer than I should have. But I think like when I look at it, look at the trail, is so obvious how it really worked to get me to where I wanted to be and where I needed to be. Because I kept saying like I want to work for Marvel, I want to work for Marvel, but I also like video games. I want RPGs, but I like Marvel. And then I got that job was a Marvel game, or our Marvel RPG game, and I'm like, all
You
right,
literally
cool.
got your cake and ate it too.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, all right, that's cool. Um, and no, it was just great. And so I was just, like I said, I'm just really blessed. Like I was just like, that was crazy. If I was even like thinking about taking a job in Singapore, there was like an offer that I got in San Francisco to work on as Supercell, as an art director at the
Oh, wow.
time. And friends were like, you should take it, you should take it. But a huge part of me is trusting my intuition. And something that like I know it was all the things that I would have loved, in the sense of like they were like, yeah, do you like traveling? I'm like, I love traveling, like, things, living in San Francisco, which I love San Francisco. The money was right. It was at the time the largest grossing game like the world at the time. It was like all these things, but I remember being like, but that's taking me too far off of my path.
Mhm.
So I wanted to make sure I stayed on that path, and that's eventually what happened. And I'm happy that I didn't take that job, So long-winded story, but that's basically what happened.
Yeah, no. But it's awesome. Sorry, Mia, wait, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh no,
Oh,
no,
no,
I was just saying that was amazing to
oh,
hear
thank
this
you.
whole story.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it sounded like you manifested, like literally manifested a lot of your career just by doing things that were inherently risky, but they actually did pay off. And I know there's a lot of people who are probably watching, artists have a trend of being introverted, who may feel shy or intimidated by the fact that you went out there and talked to all these people. So, like, what would you say to the people who are afraid to open themselves up in that kind of way? And like, how did you get past that barrier of,
Yeah.
of being able to open yourself up like that and be vulnerable?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I was a real extreme introvert, like, anxiety to the moon, basically.
Yeah.
I was to the point where for school, when they would ask, per week, they would say, one of you guys has to, or two of you guys have to do the Pledge of Allegiance in front of the class. My class was small. It was like 12 people. I would get so sick to my stomach and start sweating that I would leave. So eventually, when I knew it was going to be my week, I would just magically be sick the whole week to avoid doing the Pledge of Allegiance. It's like the thing
Wow.
I've been doing since like forever. But eventually, it's funny. It's kind of a roundabout way, and it might be too long of a story. But basically, I felt once I stopped doing art, and I started kind of being around people who were not artists, we started doing non-artist things and having to talk to people, even like talking to girls, like things like that are very outside of myself. Once you do those type of things enough, it's like, oh, socializing could actually be practice too.
Yes.
And so sometimes one of the things I do enjoy doing is just kind of chatting with people who I may not know and just hearing them out and knowing how to have a conversation. And it's kind of like foundations with anything, where it's like there's certain things that we're all gifted at, but if you have the foundations of something, it's not too hard to rely on the foundations, and that could take you pretty far as well. But also generally being very interested in people, which is like, luckily, I think something most introverts technically have,
Yeah.
typically have. And anyone likes to talk about themselves, right? So you win. I feel like as an introvert, you kind of have a leg up on most extroverts, where we typically analyze people very well, because that's just inherently who most of us are. And based on that, we also are aware of being sometimes we can be too socially aware, but sometimes that works in our benefit. So it's actually like, I would say being introverted is actually a superpower, And if you're able to like kind of plan how you're gonna approach the one, just knowing the first few steps actually really does help. One of my biggest ways, and this is like the most crazy shit to even say out loud, but one of my biggest ways that I actually got over my introverted nature was I forced myself to take a speech class, like just like a run of the mill college speech class. And I took it at night because I was that embarrassed and shy. And I was like, well, there's probably going to be way less people at night. But also before that, I would enter like freestyle battles.
Are you serious?
Yeah, like right in Merck Park. And I was like, if I can do this, and it's at night, it was all the things, it was dangerous, but it was at night, it was, you just coming off the cuff, just saying whatever. And it was like that practice actually really did help a lot, because I don't get the jitters, right? And if I do, I know how to kind of play it off a little bit. So as long as I know the first line of what I'm going to say, I'll be fine. And generally that's what it is. It's like I've recognized the patterns of who I am. And one of the things is like kind of knowing when to be prepared and knowing when not to. And so for those moments, I would just kind of prepare, like analyze what I want to do and what I want to say, but also knowing how to get straight to the point. Because the longer I'm in the kitchen, the more I'm going to like kind of start getting a little nervous, and kind of knowing how to communicate in a quick and efficient way, and eventually getting what I need, right? Or making the connection I need, whatever the bit is. But I think like recognizing that being introverted is actually a superpower, not a disability, I think is like probably the first step for most of us artists who are introverted.
I really love that way of looking at it a lot, because I think a lot of people think that it is a hindrance, and being able to view it in such a much more positive light like that, in terms of what it actually gives us as an advantage, rather than just like, oh, extroverts seem like they have it all, blah, blah, blah. And like, they really don't, because like there are drawbacks to both ways of being, right?
Definitely.
And I think the drawback of being an extrovert is that you do have to give out a lot of your own energy to like, continue this on, and you have to rely on being around people. Well, we can get from both, because I think introverted artists, especially, like when we're all around each other, I feel like that is energizing, even if like we are spending our time anyway, we're spending it like drawing together or whatever.
Yeah.
We're just talking about stuff that we nerd out about because we've internalized so much of this stuff. So we can so not only can we, really observe social situations and understand, how people kind of function and react, but we can also draw out what makes people get really excited, because we talk when it's necessary, and we talk when we're excited too. And so we share in that space together, and we can really activate that energy. And I think that's awesome. So I love that way of looking at it.
And it's much more genuine too, I think. No
Yeah,
offense.
it really is.
But it's kind of like, if you get an introvert excited to speak to you, that it's a genuine thing, because they can't really fake it. So
it's like no small talk, no bullshitting. It's like when we choose to talk, it's real, it's like
yeah, exactly. No, 100%.
Yeah. But not to knock extroverts, y'all are awesome too. Like we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. Society just honors extroverts a little bit more, so I want to give up to the introverts out here.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Be out here running a podcast. So so it's a proof. But that story is really amazing. Seriously, Mike. What I'm really also curious about though is, that conversation with Phil, and how that went, because I guess we know how it went, but I would love to like hear about how that happened in the first place, because I know that was one of your goals too.
Yeah, no, it's actually kind of funny, because the conversation with Phil was the weirdest conversation. I got a hold of him, but he was so busy that week that like I couldn't really get a hold of him. So I actually kind of stalked him, because I was like, you're not getting away from me. I've come too far. I never told him the full side of this story, so he'll probably hear this. But like I said, I drove from LA, and after being in depression for 6 months, I was like, no one's getting away from me. So, I was trying to get in contact with him. He wasn't really responding. I'm like, you're not getting away from me. I'm going to find you. So I'm like looking at every schedule. I'm like, where's he going to be at this time, this place. And I would just show up and be like, and he's like, hey, what's up, man? I'm like, yeah, and we're just chatting it up and we're kicking it. But once again, he's super busy. And so eventually there was this guy named Greg Hopwood, really sweet guy. He saw me like trying to get around, like seeing me probably look like I was like loopy, looking, trying to find where I need to be. And he would just kind of offer advice and kind of like, hey, come with me, like, giving me good game and stuff like that. And eventually I bumped into Phil again. And then Phil, we like exchanged numbers, but we actually didn't talk for like a few years in between that time. Mainly because also I didn't want to like feel like I was forced to depend on anyone, which is like kind of my own stubborn nature. I can be a little bit too independent sometimes. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I need to figure this out myself. Like, so I would figure out how to like get into the games and, work on a film here and there. But eventually we had a mutual friend that was like, I guess he was like, yo, I think you guys would really get along. And then that's when we became like actually cool. And that was like probably like maybe 3-4 years after the initial connection, which was funny. So yeah, eventually then when we talked about the company, it was funny because we both, or the three of us actually, me, Phil, and Albus, we all had our own visions of what we wanted to do. And it just so happened, after not really talking to him much at all, he had a similar vision that I had in the sense of like doing this company that would kind of like help cultivate like BIPOC talent and like placing them in the industry and eventually like letting them grow and divide and conquer. But like let them do their thing. And it was like kind of crazy because with Aldous, I guess this is going into like the whole thread of this conversation that we've been having is I saw Breakfast Club. I don't know if you guys look at Breakfast Club, but I do a lot. But generally, I'm really bad with like knowing celebrities. Like,
yeah,
I'm really bad at recognizing faces as well. Like, terrible. I don't know why, but I just am. And I never really care to listen to like celebrities really speak much when I'm like listening to the Breakfast Club specifically. But there just happened to be a time when I was like cleaning my room and I like, it was, how YouTube goes and carries into the next video.
yeah.
This guy talking, and I don't know who he is at the moment, but he mentions Art Center. And I'm like, that sounds like a brother, and I think I heard Art Center. So let me
tune in real quick.
Right? And so I'm like listening to him, and I'm like, I really like the way this guy speaks. Like, he's really like kind of aware of all this stuff that's going on. And I remember being like, I'm gonna work with this guy someday. Like I said it out loud. I'm gonna work with this guy someday. This dude, he's on. My dumb ass. I'm like, how are you gonna work with this guy? Like, you're just gonna work with this guy someday, like this actor who makes watches, really? And so about a year later, me and Phil are talking about this idea of the company, and he has this guy in the meeting, but I didn't recognize him because I'm terrible with faces.
Yeah.
So I like eventually asked him like after the third meeting, I'm like, hey, I've been embarrassed to ask, but what's your friend's name again? And he was like, oh, Aldous? And I was like, Aldous, oh. He was like, Aldous Hodge? And I was like, wait, where do I recognize that name? I look in my save folder. I have a saved folder of like just inspirational people that I admire.
Yeah.
And he was the one. And I was like, oh shit, it's okay. So it was like hilarious that like I know when I tell them that story, they probably don't even believe it, but that's really what happened. So it's kind of crazy that the three of us kind of linked up, and it's because Aldous and Phil knew each other since childhood. In fact, Phil taught Aldous how to draw. So
Are you serious?
yes. So what are the chances of that happening? But that's what happened. So yeah, it was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And yeah, once again, like you manifested this thing, and a year is a really quick turnaround for that manifestation happening.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, what are the chances of that specific guy? I don't know. That sounds nuts. I'm like, someone's probably gonna think I'm crazy. They're like, yeah, okay, sure, that really happened, but that's what happened.
Part of what I love about your story about how you met Phil was that you went after him to meet him, like a lot of people do at conventions. They're trying to make connections with people in the industry. But when you guys actually connected, it was like you said, a few years later, and it was genuine, and that's why your relationship has stood the test of time. But I guess why I'm bringing this up is like sometimes it feels like this is my only chance to meet this person, and it might not be. You know, you never know when your paths will cross again. So I just love that. Anyway, I just love the story that you had there. That it's just it was so serendipitous, but it was also like genuine, like came out of a genuine friendship too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of generally how I like to move is like very much I kind of like how ignorant I can be sometimes. And like not fully knowing who people are and stuff like that. And so I kind of like prefer it that way. And I'm happy that I did meet him in like kind of a genuine way, as well as like Phil. Like I knew who Phil was, but I also was like, I don't want him to think that I'm trying to use him.
Yeah.
Like also I'd rather just kind of get it on my own. And if we happen to connect again, we connect again. I have a thing though, like for me, I'm like, I prefer people to use me, just don't take advantage of me.
Yeah.
Right? So like because I am a resource, you know, and I do prefer people like if you have a question or if you need help, like, yeah, reach out for sure. Just don't take advantage. To me, those are two different things, you know. But I don't ever want people to feel like I'm doing that to them. So I kind of like give space a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, that's great.
I can understand that too. And yeah, your thought was really similar to mine too. When you get to talk to people on a level of actually like connecting to them and relating with them, that yeah, that can really land a much better positive relationship rather than somebody who's always asking and demanding something from an artist rather than returning. And I think I had mentioned this, I think last episode too, but one of the people who had asked the question at your panel had said something like that too, where it's like, think about what you can also offer this person. It was Patricia, our editor now, which is pretty cool. But so she actually lived that like, you know, fully, but it is true. It's just like, you know, being a genuine person and being good to the people who you are around. And also the fact that we have so much stuff to relate to and so much that we have in common just by being artists in this industry. You know, it's a really good threat to have.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I fully agree. It's kind of the easiest way. And I think sometimes people make it overcomplicated because they make it into this like business move. And it's like, or you could just be cool. Like,
yeah, right.
You know, like
it sounds so simple. But you really can be, because I think another issue too is that people put you know, the ones who they admire on such a big pedestal that they feel like that they're untouchable and they can't talk to them at all. And so they miss out on a lot of opportunities by not seeing them as like, you're another person who has gone through a journey, and everybody has their own journey. Just like talk to them and see what their journey was.
It's that simple. And like I think one of the things that I do a lot too is like I was actually having this conversation not too long ago where a friend was like, oh, like, do you ever read up on artist techniques? And I was like, no, I don't, but I typically read about artist journeys. Like I'm a big fan of like art history, like really big fan, like probably look at my bookshelves and can tell. But it's like one of those things that I really enjoy. And it's like, that's the easiest way to humanize people is to know their story, right? And so with that being said, once you get enough of those stories, you understand that everyone is human, and not only everyone is human, but you're special too, right? So like just as that person who you're placing on that pedestal may be special, you are that as well, right? And it's just one person may have lived out their potential and you may not have. That's the only difference. Or you may not have reached your potential yet. But at the end of the day, I just feel like everyone is really equal. So I don't typically look at people on like that pedestal. It's just like we're all the same, right? And it's just that simple. But with that being said, like the networking thing too is like if you're simply being cool, then you don't have to worry about any of this stuff coming back and looping and smacking you in the face. Which I've seen a lot of the times in the industry where I heard someone say this one time, and it was like one of the best pieces of game that I got inadvertently. But he was like, yeah, you know, like this guy was already in a position and working really well in the industry. And he's just like talking to another friend who I happened to overhear. And he was like, you know, when people are talking to me only to get a job, I know what they're doing. And he's like, and I don't like it. And I was like, noted. Like, it's just like, I'm like in the shadows. And I'm like, word. But he was just like, yeah, it stuck with me. He was just like, I can tell. And I was like, that's actually a good piece of game. Like if someone else were to just say that in like a more finessed way, I think that would help people understand that if you're talking to people, just talk to them and talk to them, you know? You don't have to like talk to them to get something out of it. And even if you do and say you manage you build these friendships, but you're only contacting people to get something, eventually that pattern starts to wear old. And then you kind of start to tear down that relationship. So sometimes it's just best to even check on someone. Hey, how's it going? What are you up to? Oh, I saw this thing that you did the other day. Congratulations. Simple things. It's funny. It's really the simple things that like really help elevate everything, especially socially. And so I think like, once again, jumping back to that question that you asked, is like, as an introvert, we typically overthink things, but in fact, it's really the simple things. And if it's something very simple and you're like, I'm wondering if I should do that, you should just do it.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
So I think that's the safest way to have a conversation. It's just like, be genuinely interested in people and knowing when to close your mouth and just like listen. I think it's like a big part of it. Sorry, I had to like jump 2 steps back because I was like, did I answer that question?
Oh, no. That was a really good way to tie it back into. And also the thing about journeys as well, something that has really struck me since doing this podcast has been the amount of artists that we talk to and how different every single person's journey has been and how inherently interesting and also really inspirational it is too.
Yeah.
Because, like we're all successful in our own ways and there's so many diverse ways to get to there. And a lot of it is through, like a lot of things that didn't just fall into anybody's lap. Like we all went for it in our own ways. Like we were all very hardworking and, went for it. And I think hearing about that and getting an understanding of where someone comes from is like the easiest way to gain that, like, that line of communication and be like, hey, how did you get this? Like, how did you get into the industry? Like, what did you do? Like, it's such a straightforward thing to ask because there's always a journey associated with it. There's always a big story and it's probably going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's so true.
What.
You're totally right. It's funny that you say that. One of the big things I remember being told was by a lot of people is you have to get popular on the internet. And I kept saying that, like, you have to. And knowing myself, I heard that and I was like, so I will not.
I reject this reality.
Yeah.
My own.
Like, why do I do this to myself? But I literally was like, oh, I have to do this, so therefore I won't. But then I realized that couldn't be any further from the truth.
Yeah.
Like, the internet is not the only way to get work. And a lot of the times people quantify a follower or a like to an actual human interaction when in fact it's not. If we're talking about conversion, it's like, think about it, like US is worth, if $1 in the US, you go somewhere else that's like 19 to equal $1 here, it's the same thing with online sometimes. It's like one human interaction can really take you very far. And a lot of times I think people just kind of they don't recognize that sometimes online is not a reality. And that was something that kind of jumping into this is like, it's really easy the easiest thing you can do is like recognize who you are and recognize what your strengths are, and knowing how to control your strengths, I think is like the best thing that we can do, but we don't. So I knew for a long time, I was like, I'm not someone who likes being online. I don't really like doing the whole internet system, but I do like meeting people, and I'm going to do that. And so that's why I would go to these workshops. I was just going to meet people and talk to people. And I wouldn't just go for people who were like all the way up here. I would go for people who were on my level as well, right? Because eventually we'll get there. And looking around, we all got there, So it's like, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't think that not everyone's journey isn't your journey, but recognizing your own strengths and knowing how to use those strengths is what's most important, So I think when it comes to art as well, knowing who you are is the best thing you can possibly do. And just that's just the way. I mean, even martial arts is the same damn moves. But it's the same thing. It's just the same thing everywhere. You know, like I look at like someone like Gustav Klimt, who's like my favorite artist, and I'm like, he was doing traditional academic work, and then he said, "Fuck this."
Yeah.
He did his own thing, and most of us don't even know what his academic work looks like because we see what he really did and what he really wanted to do. You know, Picasso was a talented traditional academic artist as well, and then said, "Huh, those African statues over there, I really like that," and then took it and then made it cool. Like
Yeah.
he did that, but it's his work is astounding, and we recognize him for that, right? It's just like recognizing what we like and what we enjoy, and not feeling the need to like bend to anything. I think is like pretty important, but also that can be the way you stick out, right? So
Yeah. I'm actually really curious about that too, just in regards to yourself, because you're the work that you do is amazing, and your art is just fantastic. I'm really curious if there was a time where you felt like you were compromised in terms of the art that you were creating, and like how, like what you did to break out of that and to be yourself.
yeah, I was totally doing that all the time. Like I like sound like I'm on like some high tower, and I'm like, nah, I was doing that shit too.
Oh, we were all doing
Yeah,
that.
I remember one of the most embarrassing stories. I was like going to this place called GDC, which is like in San Francisco. It's like a games conference, and I was gonna go and show my portfolio, and I did a year's worth of work trying to like develop this portfolio. Halfway along the drive, I'm like getting like me and my friend are driving out there, and I'm like, oh shit. And they're like, what? Did you leave something? I'm like, I didn't put any dragons in my portfolio. And then they're like, wait, what? And I was like, I don't have any dragons in my portfolio. They won't know that I can do dragons. And they're like, but do you like drawing dragons? I was like, no. And they're like, so what the fuck are you talking about? I was like, oh yeah, you got a point. Like, but it's like I was like finding myself trying to bend into that, and just because I saw what was popular at the time. This is like what 2010, 2011, 2012, where like a lot of these companies, like these cool like fantasy projects, were like the only thing you saw. And I'm a huge fan of fantasy, so I was like, oh well, that's the only way to do fantasy is to have a cool dragon in your piece, right? Which is furthest from the truth. But then eventually I started looking through ArtStation and stuff like that. I think it was like CG Hub was another website. And I was looking through, and I remember being like, I see a few holes because when I'm looking online and then when I'm seeing what's actually being produced, a lot of people are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And if I'm growing tired, I think knowing how the industry kind of turns over, eventually people are going to be tired. And I was like, I remember reading Jeff Jones is like one of my other favorite artists, and he was people used to call him a clone of Frank Frazetta, but eventually Frank was like, nah, like, why be a second class me when you can be the best you, essentially. Yeah. And Jeffrey Jones is one of those artists who, when I look at his work, I personally felt his work more than Frazetta's, even though I know Frazetta's like an amazing artist, and I'm gonna get crucified for saying this, but I know what I like.
Yeah.
Right? It typically is like kind of softer emotional work. And Jeffrey Jones does that. And that's something that I can't imagine Frazetta doing. Right. So when I look at that, and I remember being like, well, I see these holes in the industry. And I know what I enjoy. I know what I'm relatively good at, even though it actually took people to tell me what I was good at for me to be good at it. I recognize that I could like push that a little bit further. And one of the things is like just like doing cool things for the sake of cool is cool, I guess. But it's all about what I think is cool. Right. And whenever we have an opinion, our opinion is not just our own. Our opinions are magnifications of millions of people. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're never alone in what you think is cool or what you think is true or blah, blah, blah. If people could think that flat earth is a real thing, then that lets you know that there's millions of people who will agree with you on anything.
Yeah.
Earth is flat. So I was like, I need to do stuff that I think is cool. And that once I started diving into that and just being a little bit more emotional with my work, and even in design, you can still input emotion. That's when I think I started to like kind of find a rhythm and a pattern that started getting me hired. And a lot of times I recognize that people don't know what they're hiring me for. And that's cool too. But it's all about, as long as I know, that's all that matters, right? And it's just me being myself. That's it.
That's awesome. Is there a piece that you feel like defined it for you?
Yeah, I did this piece of a Black woman, like it was like a profile image. And I remember before I was looking at my portfolio, like at the time I was doing like, I thought cool stuff, right? But it was still, once again, me like fitting into a mold. And one day I'm just like sitting down and I was playing some music and I just kind of got in a trance essentially, and I started painting. And I was like making all these design rules as I was painting on the go. And I remember I posted it. It got a much larger reaction than anything I've ever gotten. And I remember being like I have a best friend, Drew, who I would send my work to, and he's like an amazing painter, like scary amazing. And he was like, "Oh, did you do this?" And I'm like, everyone asked that. Yeah.
Everybody asked that.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, because it was different from what he's seen me do prior. And he was like, "Oh, I think this might be one of your best pieces." And I was like, "Really?" And I was like, "I only did it in like a few hours." And he's like, "Yeah, I think it's like your best one." And then I posted it and it was a bigger reaction. And I was like, "What the hell was the difference between all the other things I did and this?" And I remember just kind of recognizing, I was like, "Oh, I was coming from a real place." That's all it was. And then I did a few other pieces that were coming from that same place. Once again, it's like funny, those pieces don't take long. It's just because I'm not trying to fulfill someone else's, vision. I'm fulfilling my own. And so it just comes out, right? It's like writing a piece of poetry essentially. And I recognize like, oh, there's this thing that keeps happening whenever I just do what I want to do, it works. So I'm gonna just do what I want to do. And I think like a lot of the artists that we really admire, that's all they did, is they did what they wanted to do. They didn't do what everyone else wanted them to do. They did what they wanted to do within the confines of other people's, say rules or whatever, but they did what they wanted to do. So once I did that, I think that was like the first thing. And then I started trying to like exercise that, which was trusting myself. Because I think it's really easy to not trust yourself. It's like always like the outside chatter that makes you doubt yourself. But it comes a time when you have to be like, nah, I think I know what I like. I think I know what I'm doing. Right. And the more you exercise that, the more it happens. And it's also an intuition base. And I've kind of said it before as well, as just like everything is kind of like a muscle, and intuition is just that. And if we have a loud voice and a quiet voice, our loud voice being here and our quiet voice being here, the more you exercise your quiet voice, the louder it gets, right? So for some people, their quiet voice is really quiet. And for some of us, our quiet voice is extremely loud because we're always in there. We're always kind of exercising that part of us. And so eventually, that's when you do start to take chances, whether it's artistically or through life, socially, that enable you to kind of make strides. And it's just trusting yourself, trusting your intuition. So yeah.
I love that.
Me too. I feel like I resonate with so much of what you're talking about. And I just wanted to tell you just how inspiring it's been to hear how you went from these moments where you were, like you said, you were depressed, where it felt kind of like nothing is going to happen, nothing's going to work out, and then to taking a chance on yourself. And I know it's probably not like a switch that goes on or off, but it's just been amazing hearing you kind of go from there to where you are now, which you seem incredibly self-aware. And even just what you were saying, that you understand, I don't think I'm remembering it right, but you said kind of like the pattern of who you are, like you understand that you're not actually trying to change it or fight it. You're just using what you have. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you so much. No, I remember, and I really appreciate that, by the way. There was this teacher who, he was talking about the industry, but I have a thing about relating everything to everything. And that's really important to who I am as well. But like he said, you never want to ride underneath the wave. You always want to be ahead of the wave. Because once you're on the wave, it's too late. And so I think when it comes to like recognizing the patterns of yourself as well as the patterns of the world, like, and when I say the world, I mean your world. Um, it's kind of like you can't fight it because the world won't let you. So you might as well just go with it. But figure out the best way to utilize that pattern to your advantage, right? And I think like anything that we are, I think a lot of things are seen as weaknesses, but they're not. I remember even for myself, like there was a time when I was like, oh shit, like is being black a weakness here? Like this doesn't seem like it's gonna work for me. But I remember also being like, no, this is a strength
Yep.
because there's not many who look like me. So if I do something good, it's going to be recognized. If I make an impression on someone, it's going to be recognized. I'm not going to blend in with everyone, right? I have a voice maybe that's not being utilized throughout the industry yet. That's a strength. Like all these things are strengths, right? But the fact that I remember hearing other Black artists say that they would make their profile pictures into like things that were not themselves, because they would get like racist attacks and things of that nature. And I was like, damn, that sounds like a weakness, but it's not, right? And when you look at them now, it's like a lot of those same people who, will continue to go unnamed, are killing it, like doing amazing work. And it's like, but now everyone knows you're Black and you're still doing great.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's like nothing, and this is like, I think probably from my martial arts background, is like, no, there's no such thing as a weakness, right? And any weakness that you have is more so in your mind, but it's never going to be physical. So it's like, if you're small, it's a strength. If you're big, it's a strength. If you're fast, it's a strength. If you're slow, it's a strength. But you should never allow things to end at, this is a weakness. Just that, if you do that, that's lazy thinking, essentially, right? So I typically think that way for everything. It's like there are no weaknesses. It's I'm not utilizing this thing to its strength, if anything. So
yeah. I love that. Like that's something that I've had a challenge with personally too, just because I recently, like last year, got diagnosed with ADHD, and thinking that who I just inherently was as a person was a weakness. But in reality, I probably wouldn't have been able to do half of the things that I could do if I didn't have it.
yeah.
So I've been like, actively working on changing the mindset and really considering that a strength. And also like with those people who wanted to hide their identity because they're being attacked online, people are probably attacking them because they know it's a strength that they're Black artists and that they're doing this good being Black. And so, it's their insecurity that's making them lash out. It's just like that kind of makes me want to fight back harder. And like, it makes me want to show up more, knowing that people don't want to see me here because they don't want to see our strength and they don't want to see us in our power. And so, yeah. And so we can prove easily that there's a lot of advantage to being people who look like us, like being diverse, like, marginalized artists in a space that not many of us are. Also, people remember us better because there ain't that many of us out there.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, it actually works out for the better, I think, like all of that stuff. And that's so true. I always think that like that too. It's like, yeah, people are most likely going to remember you because there's not that many. But no, it's a real thing. I think like it's so easy to look at things like that and just kind of like allow it to take over, but it's like it shouldn't, like even in a sense of emotion. And one of the big things that I've learned over time was like I would have people who would be afraid to get angry or afraid to be sad. And it's like all emotions and everything, just think about it. Everything that we've been built to be is so efficient. The human body is so efficient. There's nothing there that's just there. It's there for a reason. And so if you're feeling emotion, those things are there for a reason, and you have to give it a reason. And one of the things I think is that most emotions are fuel to act, right? So sometimes you get sad, it's a fuel to act. You get angry, it's a fuel to act. I utilize all of my emotions, like all the time. And I think that it's helped me more than it hasn't. So I think that, like I said, like none of these things are weaknesses. They're all strengths. It's just recognizing why they're strengths. You use a screwdriver to screw. You use a hammer to hit a nail, right? And it's like, but if you're trying to use a hammer to screw, then yeah, it's wrong, right? That might be a weakness. But if you use it for what it's for, it's a strength. So, long story, but yeah, I think that that's just the way to handle things. There are no weaknesses. Just are you using yourself to the best of its abilities?
Yeah, that's awesome. And it seems like also, what kind of martial arts do you do, by the way?
So I started off boxing for the longest, but as mentioned, my mentor, essentially my babysitter, was 3-degree black belt in kung fu. So when I was coming up really young, I was always just doing kung fu with him. But it wasn't like a thing that it was like, oh, you're going to this dojo. It was like, hey, come over. We're about to do some kung fu. He had an older son, and he would make that older son kind of train with me throughout. And then eventually I got into boxing, and I was doing karate as well. And so and then I ended up, the last thing I ended up doing was ninjutsu. Um, but I think that those things were great because all of the experiences I gained from that, I see how similar they are to art. And then I also see how similar those industries in which like boxing, like super like promotion is terrible, but boxing and like MMA is so similar to the art industry. And so it's like really funny. Like sometimes I think like art is so abstract. It's hard for us to know what's good, what's bad. It's hard for us to like recognize foundations. And it's also hard for us to recognize how to move in an industry because it's so abstract. But if you look at something that's concrete, like MMA or whatever, boxing, whatever, it's so concrete. You can literally transplant this there, and it's like the same, So I think that that's one of the big reasons why I like to kind of learn new things, and also I understand that I have that background because it helps me see art in a different way, I think. And just like simply like understanding anything, I think, is a good idea and a good way to learn about art because it is such an abstract and sometimes opinionated thing. You could think that this thing is good and someone's like, that's shit, right? But it's like, that's not always true, right? Like,
it's just not for you, probably.
Yeah, it's not your steez. But I think it's like it's not necessarily just like doing MMA or whatever, because I rock climb as well, right? And it's like that's another thing that I can see it. I'm like, oh yeah, these principles are the same. Everything is so connected. There's nothing that's that special.
Yeah.
Like, truly, And so yeah, those are martial arts I did, but it's just mostly now I do things for connectivity, like to like understand like how other things are working more so. And also train my mind more so than anything else.
I was actually going to mention that too, because it sounds like you have a lot of mastery over your mind and over your mindset. And just like, I think it gives you that discipline to really focus yourself and to focus on how to grow and be better rather than to wallow and like, get down on yourself when times are hard. Like, obviously everybody kind of does, but to get out of that and to find the best solutions possible for yourself out of bad situations. Like, I feel like all that discipline is really important. And I would love to do a martial art because I would love to be able to have that kind of discipline to better than I have now. Like all these different experiences gives you those perspectives. And it's just really interesting to hear how you draw parallels between these things that a lot of people would see as inherently very different, but they're really not. You're right. They're really not.
Yeah. Everything is the same. And like, it's funny in regards to, like kind of getting or wallowing. It's like, I do believe that people should be allowed to wallow, but only for a certain amount of time.
Like, completely agree.
It's like cry, whatever you got to do, like that's okay. But if you're staying in that place, you're choosing now to stay in that place. And you have to be able to drag yourself out of it and understand, like, what do I need to act or how do I need to act? Because my big thing is I don't want to stay feeling that way. So I need to figure out how to not feel that way.
A lot of people prefer to just use excuses.
Right. And it's funny because like every bad thing that happens for a good reason. And so understanding that, it's like, what is the message, right? When this bad thing happens, what is the message? I've seen so many times with like the patterns of other friends, something bad seemingly happens and they've always elevated past where they were once they got over it. And I'm like, that's a pattern. It's always the same thing. It's like when you're soon to outgrow something or someone, that's all it is. You outgrow it, and now you're trying to stay boxed in this situation or this person or this corporation, and it's time for you to advance. And whether you want to accept that or not, it just is what it is, But I think like, yeah, everyone should cry or allow themselves to or feel bad for a second, but be like, and then, just switch it up, like
Yeah.
cry and then get angry and then get to work,
Feel your feelings and keep moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when it stops being helpful, that's when you stop.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's it. That's
Exactly.
it. It's once it's no longer helpful, there's no more. I have an auntie who says this thing no longer serves you, right? It
Mm.
talks about so many different things, and I think like when people think serve, they're thinking of it in a different way. But she's literally like, "Is this helpful for you now or not?" And once you start thinking like that, you recognize how many bad things you may still have on you, bad connections you may still have, or directions you're going in that are no longer serving you. And it's just sometimes time to evolve. And sometimes that means letting things go. um, and sometimes that could be old ways of thinking, right? And I thought I was going to be an environment concept artist. And someone said, your environments are all right, but your characters are really strong. You should do that. And I was like, all right, guess I'm letting go of what what I thought I was gonna be doing. All right, word. But it's just like you just have to be able to evolve and adapt. And I think like for a lot of people, we we tend to look at people's success and think that means that they're super intelligent, right? Or look at someone's grades and think that they're super intelligent. But what it really is noticing someone's adaptability.
Yeah.
That's to me true intelligence, because that's the only intelligence that's universally recognized, not how you read a book, right? I think there's a saying, if you are judging a fish's intelligence by how it climbs a tree, then you're the dumbass.
I've heard that one too. That one's really good to me.
It's so good. It's like on point. It's like, yeah, because they can swim. But it's just one of those things. Like I think just connectivity is like so important, and like recognizing like how do you adapt to a situation, because there's always going to be something new. There's always going to be something that you need to grow from. And sometimes when you're not getting the message, the world's just going to keep slapping you with it until you figure it out.
Absolutely.
Mike, if you don't mind this question, what would you say, in light of what you just talked about, what would you say to young students that are just coming up into the art industry right now with everything going on, everything that seems to be changing right now? What do you say to people, like to give them hope?
Yeah, I think trusting in the process is one of the biggest things, but also not trusting in the process, but not being a slave to the process as well. Because as mentioned, as we talked about earlier, sometimes things work out for other people and it just doesn't work out for you. But having a foundation in anything is always going to be important and helpful. So it's like you can always trust that your foundations are going to get you somewhere. But then with anything, you always need to have that spice of you in there. There's like kind of this, what they call the special ingredient, right? If you like look at any amazing design, it's like they took from this thing and that thing, and then they added some spice on it, and that's what made it special.
Yeah.
I think that like one thing we understand is foundations are always important, right? And having an opinion is really important, and inserting yourself into that magical stew is also really important. But I think like making sure you're not rushing to get from point A to point B is important, because like anything, it's kind of like, I'll use it in terms of rock climbing. Like women typically are better rock climbers than men, right? And the reason why is because men are super strong, so they get to just depend on their strength. Women typically are smaller, so they have to like depend on being technical. And so it's really hard to say to someone, all right, you've managed to climb this many levels by just focusing on your strength, but now you have to go back and learn foundations. Chances are they're going to be like, hell nah. Right? I ain't doing that. But if you focus on that foundation and then you say, all right, now that you have this amazing foundation, now let's do some strength training. They're going to be able to keep on growing from there because their foundations are always strong. But the chances are that person who rushed to get from point A to point B, they're not going to go backwards. And so I think like I have a rule about redlining every stage you're in. So if you're a student, be a student, but be a badass student. Ask the questions that you're embarrassed to ask. reach out to other people who are on your level and try and like find a group or a collective and like really utilize the fact that since you're a student, no real question you ask looks silly, right? You're not expected to know. Once you're in this next stage of like, oh, I'm a junior, make sure you're asking all the questions to the people who are in your peripheral and all the like seniors and all that, and make sure you're being seen. Make sure that you're understanding that they recognize that you're a junior. Use that as hard as you can to your advantage. Then when you become a senior, you now have all these tools that you've gathered and you're able to use it effectively now, you know? So I think like some people, they really want to rush things. And it's like, you shouldn't, because there's these things that I think make it really easy to say, I want to get from here to here because I'm gonna be safe. But it's also like understanding that when you get this high, you're always going to drop down a little bit, right? They say shoot for the moon, you aim, you're gonna fall on a star type of thing. It's like it's the same thing with everything we do. So as long as you're like redlining and making sure that you're getting each stage as well and understood as possible, you're probably going to be in a really good spot and you won't fall that hard, you know, regardless of whatever you do. So that'll be my advice for like students and stuff like that. Is just to make sure that you let the ego go, essentially, what it kind of falls down to.
It's a very humbling career, so it's good to learn that early.
Man, we be getting the asses
kicked. All the L's right now.
Always.
Everything is coming to get us. We got AI art and NFTs and then platforms.
All
the time, and things are just as. I'm like, we just want to draw.
Yeah. I just want to draw. That's it. It's like, imagine this thing that you've been doing since you were a kid. You make money for it now, but now the world has an opinion on what you do, right? This thing that you used to just show your mom. You're like, Mom, look, I did this picture. And she's like, of course, oh, that's great, honey. And then you go away, you're like, yeah, I did a great thing. Now you have the internet. You have the whole world like, man, that thing you made was terrible. You're like, you don't even know me. You don't know the thought that had to go into that design. Like, you don't know anything. So yeah, it's just kind of funny that we literally do have everything going against us. And I think when it comes to art, especially, people kind of undermine visual arts a lot.
They do.
Because I've heard, how many times have you heard, oh, you draw? My kid does too. And it's like
convention, like every
time.
It's like, yeah, that's cool, but there's levels, like, you know, like there's levels, like yeah, like my daughter used to play doctor too, but I'm definitely not gonna put her on the level of a doctor, you know. Like, I don't have a daughter, but you know what I mean. Like one of those things was like people undermine the importance of visual arts, and because a lot of people kind of don't have a high level of visual taste, it's easy for like things like AI to kind of take over. To the average mind, right? You see so many times where this is too raw, but people like look on like a modern show or costume or whatever, and they're like, should have stuck to the original. And I'm like, do you guys remember what the comic book version of that thing looked like?
Oh my God, all the time they do this.
Yeah, it's like, there's no way that would look good in real life. Like, please, stick to the rivers and lakes that you're used to, you know?
I can chase the waterfall.
Right? But yeah, it happens all the time. I've seen it so many times. Like, I've learned that lesson when I used to work, embarrassing story. I used to work at the airport. I used to work at TSA, right? And TSA gets a lot of slack, and they should. But there used to be people who would be like, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? This whole thing is stupid. And it's like, you have no idea what actually is going on behind the scenes. This thing that might look stupid to you is for a very well-informed reason, but you just have no idea, you know? And seeing that, then I now understand art a little bit more. It's like someone will look at stuff and they're like, "That's dumb. They should have just did this." And it's like, okay, person who doesn't know how to draw,
Yep.
you tell me, or how to build a costume or build a set. You tell me why your opinion is what, you know? It's just kind of taking things with a grain of salt.
This rises up extremely often in game development as well, as I'm sure we all know. Oh my God. Like these people who have never touched an engine before are just like, why didn't they make this decision? Why didn't they do that? And I'm like, you have no idea all the steps that are needed to even get you to open a door in a game.
Yes.
Like, there's so much that has to happen.
Dude, like even like with films and games, it's always a miracle that those things are actually being made. Like the fact that when they get to completion, because I personally, I have this thing, and some people might think this is weird, but that's okay. I punish myself by looking at bad films, right?
No,
This is like
that's a great thing to do. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a form of discipline, but it's never. I'm never going to undermine the hard work that it takes to make a film, period. Whether it's good or bad, it's just so difficult to get from point A to point B, and like making groups or teams work together unanimously to make this thing a product. That's hard. But so it's like for us who just are sitting on our couches playing this game and being like, why didn't they just do that? It's like, dude, so many things. It's like the human body. It's like there's so many things fighting your existence every day. The fact that you're alive is pretty special. When it comes to these games and films, it's the same thing. There's budget, there's personalities, there's, all kind of corporations and tiers that like generally should tear down titles. By the time they make it to that final product, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
The people with like that have already made huge movies struggle to get their next movie made. It's like if they're struggling, imagine everything else, it's just
I'm pretty sure it's probably like 1% of all like, scripts actually probably get made into movies. I'm pretty sure it's around that. No, I don't know the exact, I don't know statistics or whatever, but just even in working in animation and just like by the amount of things that failed, that seemed like they were amazing, viable ideas that failed just because someone didn't agree. It's just like, it's truly, you are speaking the truth right now, because it is a miracle that anything exists. And it's also, and watching bad films too, or just like consuming bad content is actually really inspiring, because it also makes me think like, oh, why am I holding myself back from making the thing that I think is probably stupid? It's probably not, and it's probably definitely better than this. So
right. But also, it's like, I think one of the best lessons that I get from that also is recognizing what I shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Right? Because wise man learns from his own wise man learns from the mistakes of others, right? So it's like you look at people and you see what they're doing, you're like, ooh, I should not do that. Go left, do not go right. It's like I look at these films and of course it's important to maintain a healthy diet, right? Like you intake a lot of good things, but you also intake a few bad things here and there. Shock the system. It's the same thing with art, the same thing with our eye that we're developing. It's like, you intake a lot of beautiful things, but sometimes it's the bad things that help you recognize how good the good thing is, right? Like if we all just seen amazing anatomy all the time, we would never know what bad anatomy is. Right? You
take it for granted too, because you're so you're like spoiled, so it makes you appreciate the good stuff and see how rare it is.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just kind of funny. I think like I typically do that. I'm like, oh, I didn't do great this week. I must look at this bad movie. I don't deserve to look at this good movie. I like literally do this. I don't know why. I put myself on punishment. I don't think my parents never put me on punishment. I literally would do it to myself.
Are you Catholic, Mike? Like, what the heck?
I went to Catholic school. So
okay, there you go.
I was like, just threw it out there, and it was like, actually, slam dunk that, you won.
It's like,
Like whatever my parents did, I want to make sure I do that. I'm like, I'm not going to punish you. You punish yourself. It was like the worst punishment. Like no cartoons for a week, Dad. I'm like, no cartoons for like what? They're like, a month. It's like, yeah, that's right. It's like I don't have to do anything. I just chill, let them do whatever they got to do.
Yeah, right.
So you got it.
Oh man. That's crazy. I know we've gone way over. I've been having so much fun just like having this conversation. This is awesome.
Likewise.
Yeah, I wanted to know if you wanted to leave, the audience with anything. I know you gave advice earlier, but is there anything that you want to leave here or want to plug or anything that you're working on right now that you want to talk about? But yeah, I want to cut it before it gets too long.
Yeah, Mike, there's so many cool things. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sad about what happened with certain projects that have happened, but working on Wolverine game, that's going to be cool. Really excited about that one. Really excited for the things that 9B has in store as well. Really looking forward to that drink and draw that we have for Black History Month. It's going to be lit. It's like always like our biggest and best drink and draw. So that's going to be really fun. But we also have a lot of cool things coming around the horizon. We worked on Blue Beetle. That was like one of our big projects that we kind of worked on from start to finish, and that should be coming out really soon. But I can't really speak on the other projects we've worked on yet. But I think ultimately, like the thing that I would like to leave with people is like, it's really easy to convince yourself to not do something. It's probably the easiest thing in the world, actually. And I think setting expectations for self is really important. And when I say that is there'll be 1,000,001 people telling you what you can't do and what you shouldn't do because it's dumb or it's silly or it's ridiculous. And I think Jay-Z has a line where he says, "What you eat don't make me shit." It's the same thing, right? It's just because someone else is telling you what you can't do is more so a reflection of them than it is you. And kind of allowing yourself to chase those dreams, to chase those goals in the bravest, most courageous way possible. You'll always be happy for making an attempt than not doing it at all. And as you guys see, I connect a lot of things. I actually got that from, there was when I used to really work out like really intensely, they always would say, you'll never regret going to the gym. You'll always regret not. It's the same thing with art. It's like, you'll more so regret, or just goals in general, you'll more so regret not making the attempt than you did just going after it and failing, right? But your failure most likely will be due to lack of adaptation rather than lack of ability. So.
Bars.
That's like what I say all the time. Like, I just like hear someone like, that was a bar.
Yeah, right. Well, that was amazing. Thank you seriously so much for this conversation and for all of your insight. You are super wise and your work is amazing. So,
likewise for both of y'all. Like, y'all scare me. Seriously. I'm like, literally when I look at y'all work, I'm like, I need to step my shit up. Like all the time. Like, especially when you're gonna be drawing, your draftsmanship is like amazing. I'm like, I need to get my shit together. I always feel like, I don't know, I have this thing, like I'm a happy competitive. So like I see stuff and I get inspired more so than just being like, I need to crush. Some people who are like competitive, I more so get inspired, and I'm like,
yeah,
I see what y'all are doing, like especially with your personal work. I'm like, I need to set my shit up.
Oh my gosh. I'm saying the same for you. Like right now, I'm just like, what? You look at my work and think like, what? Like, no. Because we're all thinking about our own journeys and how far we still want to go. But that's
right, exactly.
But I'm just like, oh, that's really cool.
Isn't it funny though? It's like you look at your journey and recognize how far you have to go, but don't recognize how far you've been. But everyone else from the outside is like looking and being like, damn, you're doing the damn thing. It's like funny. I think it's like, as artists, we typically beat ourselves up. Like a lot.
Oh, yes.
And that's why it's probably, and people say that we're sensitive, but in fact, I think it's the opposite. We're so not sensitive that we beat ourselves up all the time.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
no practice. Yeah, it's like our endurance is insane. But yeah, no, it's just like really admirable, like what you guys do, and I'm like amazed that you guys have that plus the podcast. That's it's like, okay, as if that's not enough work.
Try. We're doing the best we can, but we really appreciate it. Seriously. It means a lot. And I feel very like honored to hear that. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time. So much of your time too. Like this has been so much fun. I'm sure I got a lot out of it. I'm always really inspired after these talks, like really inspired. So I can't okay, here's Prius. So I can't wait to listen back.
Prius loves it.
Yeah, Prius is really into everything. She's like, you've been ignoring me for long enough.
Right.
But yeah, Mike, thank you so much. And everybody, I hope that y'all enjoyed this conversation. Please feel free to leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this, what you heard here today. And thank you so much for joining us in the live chat. But we will talk to you later. Thank y'all so much.
See y'all.